Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for state-sponsored retirement plans and overview. I have just a few announcements. For those of you who are requesting credit, please note that to receive CE credit, you must remain logged into the video portion of the webinar for the entire program. Logging into the audio portion only is not sufficient for CE credit. Continuing education credits are being offered for the following designations: CPE, CIMA, CPWA, CIMC, RMA, CFP, and SHRM. At the end of the webinar, we would like to request that all attendees fill out the evaluation form that will pop up. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. At the end of the webinar, we'll answer as many questions as we can, but we want to be respectful of your schedule and end on time. If we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterwards. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Now let's get started. We are joined today by Kate Blake, instructional designer and technology trainer at Pentegra. Kate has been with us since the beginning of her career, where she started in the retirement benefits field. And being the quick learner and talented contributor she is, Kate quickly arose into various positions within Pentegra. Kate's been able to exemplify her deep roots of industry expertise in each position she's held, and her skills have always been the perfect complement to Pentegra's culture. Kate, I'll turn this over to you, and let's get talking about state-sponsored retirement plans.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. We so appreciate it. I am excited personally to present this material to you today because this is an evolving landscape. I don't want to say how many years ago it was that I started in the industry at this point. Well, I guess the cat's already out of the bag for my bio, but back when I started, state-sponsored plans were, a gleam in legislators' eyes, and now it's a reality. And this changes not just who we work with, but also how we work with these plans, the services that we provide, and so many opportunities are created as a result. But because this is a different population than we typically tend to work with, we want to make sure that we present these opportunities in a way that is meaningful and provides value to our clients, current and potential in the future. So to do that, today we have a number of learning objectives that I'd like to cover. First, we'll talk about mandates in the overall retirement plan landscape. The employer has a choice, of course. You're never required to adopt a plan as provided for under a mandate. An employer could adopt any one of a number of other plans. Given that, then there are plan selection considerations. Is it better to go your own way and adopt or sponsor your own plan or participate in some other plan, or is it better to go with a state mandate if you live in an impacted state as an employer? To help frame that discussion, we'll then move into a state-by-state overview, including an impact of Secure 2.0 and how that also changes the game here and how all these puzzle pieces fit together. Then I think it's so important that we frame this in a way that, again, we as service providers in the industry are empowered to provide value to our clients. So I want to talk about next steps and how we can take the mandates and make this information digestible and actionable for employers out there who may be interested in learning more, may be subject to the mandates, or clients that we already work with. And of course, there's always a chat box if you have questions along the way. So, the employer's choice. As we said, you don't have to have a mandated plan, but there are reasons why this legislation has come to the fore and has been adopted by so many states, as we'll see in just a couple minutes. Reasons including the ones that we have on this slide here. Today, workplace retirement savings plans provide the greatest share of income for retirees. As you can see on the slide, of course, this makes them critical to a successful retirement. I mean, we can think about this in practical, easy terms. A plan sponsor could sponsor a 401k plan, and that offers a high maximum annual additions limit, so people can really sock away a lot of money in these employer-sponsored plans. as compared to if you did not have an employer-sponsored plan and you were off on your own contributing to, say, a Roth IRA, which has a significantly lower level. So if you don't have a workplace plan, you're just right out of the gate at a disadvantage from an employee standpoint. 33% of private sector workers, at 49 million, almost 50 million people, do not have access to a workplace retirement plan. So this is a cohort of people who are now sort of shoehorned into finding their own methods of retirement savings. The mandates are trying to widen the net to capture some of these people. According to the Federal Reserve, even with a strong labor market and low unemployment, 28% of U.S. workers still have no retirement savings. I imagine there's a lot of overlap between the 33% of private sector workers who don't have a plan and the 28% of workers with no savings. So why state-sponsored plans? Many states mandate employers participate in the state-run retirement plan unless the employer sponsors its own plan. So this provides a streamlined method of offering a plan to many, many, many small employers. They're intended to address the gap in worker access that we mentioned before, broadening that net. The first states to adopt were California, Illinois, and Oregon. But currently, 19 states currently have programs in place, along with 2 cities, with some nuances around the cities that we'll address in just a moment, those cities being Seattle and New York City. Of those, 15 states have an auto IRA program and 2 are MEPs. So this has all taken place in the last less than 10 years. And in that time, we've gone from 0 states with mandates and a wide retirement gap to now 19 states with something in place or something, maybe in the works. So the landscape, again, is changing here. The mandates are different from quote-unquote regular retirement plans for a variety of reasons. Obviously, they are mandatory. That's why they're called mandates. But there are some other nuances I think that are key as well. This is stuff that we, as retirement plan practitioners, need to understand. And then, as we get towards the end of this webinar, we're going to make this actionable. How can we explain this to current and potential clients? So the plans are mandatory. Interestingly, the employer is not the sponsor. The state is. So that relieves a little bit of burden off of the employer. Generally, these programs are overseen by a state-level retirement plan board, giving an additional level of oversight as well. No employer contributions in most cases. So the idea here is widen the net, but don't make it cumbersome for employers. Along those lines, the employer is not a fiduciary, merely a facilitator of the plan, simply just connecting the dots between the state plan and the employee. The employer just channels the contributions to the plan. It's done via payroll deduction, just like a, quote unquote, regular plan that is not state mandated. Now, each state does have slightly different rules regarding eligibility, default, contribution rates, investments, state tax treatment, and things like that, which we're going to discuss in just a moment. But before we do, let's talk about pros and cons. So if you're in one of these impacted states and you're an employer and you don't sponsor a plan, you might be required to participate in a state-sponsored plan, depending on how that state's rules are set up. And again, we'll go through the nuances of that. But we don't want employers to just kind of fall into this without an understanding of what's happening. And this is why I say that this really changes the landscape of who we work with. Excuse me, because there are a number of presumably thousands of businesses in all of these impacted states that should be asking themselves these questions. So, if an employer isn't sponsoring a plan right now, and they're in a state that might be impacted by a mandate, some things to think about. And you can ask these questions to employers when you meet with them, or use it for prospecting purposes for consulting services. Do you not want to sponsor a plan because of cost? Is it lack of understanding? Is it too busy to explore? Or maybe some other reason? And then from there, when you get those answers, you can help guide clients and potential clients to the plan that would best suit their needs. Maybe it's a state-mandated plan. Maybe it's not a state-mandated plan. It all depends. But the way to start this is with a discussion. And the way to start the discussion is with a question. So you can use this flow in your own practice as you meet, again, with clients and prospects. How much would you like to contribute and deduct for yourself in a retirement plan? Now, this is an interesting question to start the conversation because, first of all, a lot of employers don't necessarily know that there are deduction opportunities associated with a qualified plan. Number two, it gives you a little bit of a sense for what they're looking for. And number three, a lot of these businesses, if you're not already offering a plan, tend to be on the smaller side. So framing it in this way really gets at, the heart of the need. If it's one or two or a couple of people, asking this question in terms of what an owner or a senior staff member might need can help you recommend the appropriate plan design. And here's a way to do that. So they will answer that question with a number. I want to contribute XYZ amount. It's going to be a low number, it's going to be a high number, it's going to be somewhere in between. But that one question opens the door then to a conversation where we as service providers can provide practical recommendations for plan design. If the answer is I want to contribute up to only, $8,000 or less, maybe that person just goes with a traditional or Roth IRA or perhaps a state mandate. If the contribution level gets higher, maybe in the 20,000s, a simple 401k plan, perhaps with a 2% non-elective contribution might fit that bill. I'm assuming somebody's age 50 here because we're framing the question in terms of a business owner. What are you looking to contribute and deduct? Typically, those tend to be our folks a little bit later in their careers. So I'm including catch-up contributions here. If they say they want to contribute maybe up to $30,000, well, maybe we're looking at just a regular, 401k plan then. You can go even higher, maybe with a $39,000 limit with a simple plan with a 3% match. And then you get into some more nuanced options. You could go up to $69,000 with a SEP, even higher with a 401k with a profit sharing feature. Or you can really max out your contribution opportunities and also deduction opportunities with a DB cash balance plan. Now, from here, this is beyond the scope of today's presentation, but from here, you'll have an additional conversation based on the answer to these questions. Or maybe the answer is, truly, I don't know. I am a small business owner and I just feel overwhelmed by the abundance of choice here. Maybe if that's the answer, that's an opportunity for you to look at some of those, state mandates with people. So asking that simple question really opens the door to such a great conversation about what type of plan somebody might want. With that said, let's open our first quiz. Which of the following is or are true regarding a state-sponsored retirement plan? They're mandatory in certain cases. In a state-sponsored plan, the employer is a facilitator and not a fiduciary. State-sponsored plans are overseen by a state-level retirement board, or all of the above.
The poll will remain open for another 10 seconds for anyone who has not yet selected an answer. The poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. And the answer is D, all of the above. And I think that this is such a great example of how the suite of options that we have available all have upsides and downsides. It's up to us to connect the dots between clients and potential clients or people impacted by mandates and link them up with the design that works best for them. In some cases, as we saw on that previous slide, you may have a business owner who has a strong desire to deduct a large amount of money, or perhaps a small amount of money if they have business, concerns right now. People who have a strong feeling, you can guide them one way or another based on the guidance we saw on the prior slide. But as we also said, you might have that cohort of people who say, I truly have no idea. And this quiz question is an example of how you can segue then that conversation into the state-sponsored retirement plans. Okay, XYZ business owner, you don't have strong feelings about, designing your own plan or sponsoring your own plan. Well, if you live in a mandated state, there are some benefits to this. Again, the employer is just a facilitator, not a fiduciary, so it takes the oversight off the employer's plate. And we have that typically state-level board overseeing things as well. So the state plan is not going to be the best option for everybody. I would say it's arguably not the best option for most employers, but maybe it is the best option for the specific demographic that it's trying to target, or at least an option worth considering, because this is, really designed for those small employers where the owner is not interested in contributing, maybe doesn't want the regulatory burden of sponsoring a plan. Those are good candidates for these state plans. We talked about this a little bit, but here it is in more detail. So the pros and the cons of the state plans. Some of the benefits is it does get new savers in the system. It really does expand that coverage, which is truly what we're looking to do here. As a result, it could result in increased retirement accumulations. Imagine if you live in a plan with a mandate and you start working at age 18 or 21 after college, that's a career's worth of savings, and that's really what we're trying to get for people. In turn, could reduce reliance on social programs because, again, the demographic that we're targeting here, as we said at the beginning, really are those people who don't have access to these plans and presumably, as a result, don't have a large pool of savings to pull from. But they're not perfect. There are downsides of state plans, and I think we add the most value as practitioners when we clearly express to our clients the pros and cons. Because states pick up the cost, there are concerns that private plans could go away in favor of some sort of legislated program. And that's fine, but it has a downside of the second bullet point, no incentive to save, as there typically is not a match. Typically in your employer-sponsored plans, you may have a very robust match or employer contribution opportunity. Because again, that not only provides a savings incentive for employees, but a deduction opportunity for employers. So there's a desire to do it. States and governments don't have that desire because they're not looking for deductions in the same way that a business owner might be. So there's a little bit of a downside there from an overall perspective. Some of the plans are IRA-based, as we mentioned earlier, and of course, also, as we said earlier, the IRA limits are not as high as the traditional 401k plan limits. So while it gets new savers into the system and gets them a career's worth of savings, the downside might be it might be a career's worth of savings at a slightly lower level, which is arguably better than nothing. However, I think, again, that ties into, well, what are the needs of our employer? What is this, entity really looking for, and what do they need from a business perspective? And that really is what I feel is missing, too, in the industry. When I talk to so many employers, they say, I would just love to have somebody be able to explain this to me in an easy-to-understand way. That should be, in my opinion, what we're aiming for as practitioners, because that's what empowers employers to make the right decisions, and that's what makes them want to continue to work with us as service providers. Also, I didn't mention the last bullet point. The state plans do have some fees associated with them, and I'll go through each of the state plans in detail in just a minute so you can see what's what. So with that, there's my segue. let's take a look at what's going on with these states. Now, this, don't worry if you can't read the small print at the bottom. I'll go through this, and we're going to look at each state that has legislation in detail. So if you're a blue state, you have legislation passed and programs launched. So I see at a glance here the whole West Coast, blue, Colorado, Illinois. Remember, that was one of our early adopters. And then a smattering in the Northeast up here, Maine, and a couple of others. This coral, light pinky color here, legislation passed, launched TBD. Now, this one really is a smattering throughout the country. I see Nevada, New Mexico, Minnesota, Missouri. This is a good test of my state abbreviations. Virginia, New York, and some others in the Northeast. Then we have legislation has been introduced, but may or may not have been acted on, which is the broad swath of states that you can see here. And then there's a couple that just are not considering at this time, Alabama and Florida. Now, obviously, this is ever changing. I'm going to give you the dates for all of these programs in just a minute. My source here is down at the bottom. This is as of earlier this year. But I would just say, because the space is ever changing, just, keep your ear to the beat of what's happening in the industry. Because as you'll see, as we go through the states, some of this stuff is still under consideration and still actively being developed as we speak. So again, that evolving landscape just provides such a great consulting and business opportunity for us practitioners, as long as we do it right. Now, most employers are exempt from the mandates if they maintain choose from this list, and you can see this is the standard list of plans that we would typically tend to recommend to somebody. So, a qualified retirement plan, your 401k, your 403b, your, profit sharing plans, your steps, stuff like that. You're not subject to the mandate. That's why I said at the beginning, we want to think about our clients and prospects' needs so that we can adequately recommend them to, something like what we see here. Again, depending on that limits chart that we looked at earlier and the overall needs of the business. Or if these are unsuitable, then we would, perhaps guide them towards the mandate. So let's get into the nitty-gritty for the next couple of minutes. We'll look at the specific states. We'll talk about the details, and then we'll talk about how Secure 2.0 is also changing the game, because there were a couple of provisions in there that impact new plans, credits, and things of that nature. So we'll start with California. This plan was launched in 2019, so it's been around for 5 or so years. Personally speaking, this is actually one of the first mandate states that I really started to become familiar with. When I used to be client-facing, I had several clients out in California, and obviously it's a very large state, a very heavily populated state. When we think about the business that is conducted in that state, we just can see the opportunity, but we can also see, how there's potential for confusion, because again, it is typically an underserved group if you don't already have access to a plan. So speaking of, who is mandated? It's any company with 5 or more employees. You've got to participate or certify an exemption. And the way it works is it's an auto-enroll Roth IRA, or a traditional IRA is an alternative election with a 5% default savings rate and an auto increase by 1% until we reach 8%. And by 12/31/25, so end of next year, it's going to be companies with 1 or more employees. So this is kind of a phase-in situation, which gives us a glimpse as to where the industry is going. And actually, I see a lot of things in here that kind of show me where the industry is going. The default enrollment, the auto increase, and the bringing the threshold of employee numbers down that the mandate impacts. We're going to see those themes throughout a lot of these states. In terms of investments, you've got a TDF, you've got a sustainable balance fund, which is interesting to me. This is a environmental social governance fund. which I think, is reflective of maybe some participant desires. You got a core bond fund, a global equity fund, and a money market. And I also think that it's interesting, I've noted down at the bottom here, who each one of these programs is managed by. We'll see some trends there too. So this one's managed by Ascensus. We'll keep marching along here, and a lot of this stuff is laid out very similarly. So again, you'll see these trends. Oregon, launched in 2017, so this is one of the first ones to come online. Any business with employees must participate or certify an exemption. Similar to California, auto-enroll, Roth IRA. I see Roth as a theme here too. 5% default savings rate. There's that auto-enroll, and the increase by 1% until 10%. You got a PDF, money market, S&P 500, just basic lineup managed by Vestwell. Washington is a little bit different. It's a voluntary plan. Participating financial service providers offer a couple of different types of low-cost IRAs and 401ks to companies with less than 100 employees. That includes sole proprietors and self-employed. Managed by the Washington Department of Commerce. Aspire has a couple of investment options, and so does FinHabits. Hawaii was signed into law back in 2022, but it is not yet operational. However, it will impact employers with one or more employees. They have to offer a plan. So again, there's that theme of really pretty strong coverage. The government really wants employers to offer a plan. There's that Roth IRA as a default again, and the board could choose to make the traditional available because again, this one is still in development. Default contribution rate of 5%. Now, Hawaii is also intended to be voluntary, so they have to opt in, but Hawaii is trying to provide an incentive. And this was interesting to me looking at all the states. I didn't really see a lot of this, but Hawaii plans to provide a state match of up to $500 to the accounts of the first 50,000 covered employees who participate in the program for a certain period of time, 12 months. It's a small incentive, but remember before we said one of the downsides of these mandated plans is they don't really offer that robust employer contribution. So this is an attempt to offset that. I would love to see how, the industry develops with this in the future. We have the Colorado Secure Savings Plan, which launched recently in 2023. The 5+ employees, but you have to have been in business for two or more years and don't currently offer a plan. There you go with the auto-enroll Roth. Again, the default savings rate of 5% and the increase by 1% to a max of 8%. This looks pretty similar to our California plan. In terms of investment options, there's a capital preservation option, the TDFs, bond, and international. Also managed by Vestwell. So again, there's some themes in the service providers, themes in the provisions, and themes in the investments. New Mexico is another one that is still in development. So we can really see, just so many states with opportunities here to work with business owners to help them understand, because this one's coming right down the pipeline July 1st for anybody who works with businesses in New Mexico. Partnering with Colorado's program, also managed by Vestwell, and so far we're looking at a Roth IRA situation, probably similar to what we saw in Colorado on the previous slide. Nevada is another one coming down the pipeline. So we've got New Mexico coming this July. We've got Nevada coming next July. Mandatory for 5+ employees. Need to have been in business for at least 36 months. Haven't had a plan in the 3 years immediately before your start date. Still in development on the type of account, but you can see here IRA is, looks like it's on the table. Probably an auto IRA, continuing with that auto enrollment theme. For Maine, you need to have 5+ employees, and this is starting this year in 2024. Auto-enroll Roth IRA with the option to add a traditional if desired, and you've got the same contribution set up as we've seen in many of the other plans. 5% initial, auto increase by 1% till 8%. I think this is interesting because this again speaks to the upside and the downside of these plans, the dual nature. Again, really depending on what an employer is looking for. It's great if you can get somebody in at 5% at age 21. Probably not the greatest if they're stuck at 8 for their entire career thereafter, but arguably they do have a whole career to accumulate. And I think that nuance is just what we want to make employers aware of if they are going to be subject to a mandate. Vermont's an interesting case. It was established in 2017. It's actually expected to launch last year. There's more to the story than what's shown on the slide. There was an original program, and then that program got modified. I think originally it was going to be a statewide MEP, but I think it changed to an auto Roth IRA, which is why we have the delayed start date. So that's coming down the pike this summer as well. So I think or next summer, excuse me. So we've got no less than 3 states that we've looked at so far with legislation coming imminently, or a start date coming imminently, I should say. Connecticut has one in existence since 2022, continuing the theme with the 5+ employees. You got to have it. Auto enroll Roth IRA, just a 3% default savings rate, no auto escalate, managed by Vestwell. Similar portfolio of investment options as we've seen with other states, little bit more robust maybe than some of the other more limited ones. Massachusetts Core Plan launched also in 2017. That's kind of a theme we see in the Northeast with the adoption or the legislation being a little bit earlier. This is a voluntary program, though. All nonprofits with fewer than 20 employees who have payroll administered by an eligible third-party payroll service may participate. It's a MEP, default contribution of 6% with auto escalation to 12. And this one's managed by Empower. New York has a launch TBD. Employers with 10+ employees must offer a plan. It's going to be Roth-based with a default contribution of 3%. New Jersey is similar. TBD, this one's 25 employees with a stipulation that you have to have been in business for at least 2 years. Employers with less than 15 employees can join voluntarily. Default is 3%, Roth or traditional IRA, run by Vestwell. We're almost done with looking at our state specific, and then we're going to take a higher level view and look at Secure 2.0. For Delaware, we've got Delaware Earns, which was signed into law August 2022 with a launch next year scheduled. 5+ employees must have been in business for at least 6 months, and it's going to be a Roth with the traditional, also an option as well, Roth IRA. Maryland Save, one of the more recent ones in 2022, mandatory for all companies with an automatic payroll processing that have been in business for 2+ years. There is a registration filing fee that the state will waive, $300, an auto-enroll Roth IRA with the traditional IRA as an alternative election. Again, it's interesting to me that we're kind of seeing the Rothification here of the default option in these mandates. 5% default savings rate with the auto increase by 1% up to 10. And you've got an emergency savings fund, the TDF suite of options, bond, and global growth stock. Also, continuing our themes, managed by Vestwell. So we can start to see the patterns as we move through this in the service providers too. There are a few service providers that clearly have a hand in working with a lot of these states. Here we go too, managed by Vestwell, Virginia, Retire Path VA in 2023. Businesses eligible in 2023 have to register or certify an exemption before February 15th of this year. Employers with 25+ employees that have been in business for 2 or more years must offer a plan. The auto-enroll Roth IRA is the default option, with the traditional, again, as the alternative. We've seen that, I think, in almost every state so far. 5% with the auto escalation of 1% to a max of 10. And similar investment options as we've seen in the other states managed by Vestwell. Illinois, again, was one of our first adopters. Became law in 2015, so way ahead of the curve on that one. Launched in 2018. Businesses with 5+ employees, been in operation for 2+ years and don't already offer a plan. You got the auto-enroll Roth, the traditional for those that don't Roth qualify, and again, a 5% default with the auto by 1 to a max of 10. This one is managed by Ascensus. We did see a couple, I think, earlier managed by Ascensus as well, and a suite of comparable investment options to the other ones that we've seen. Missouri is coming later this year. I think this name is so cute, the Show Me My Retirement Savings Plan. Very clever. The plan is required to start by September 1st of this year. It's going to be a MEP. No more than 50 employees or has had fewer than 50 employees in the last 5 years. Doesn't currently offer a plan. And this one's different than the other ones that we've seen, right, that were the Roth IRA based. This is the pre-tax or Roth 401k based. So interesting that Missouri has chosen to go a different direction there. Minnesota, this is also going to be later this year, 10/1/2024, mandatory with the 5 or more covered employees and doesn't offer a plan. The default also is the Roth IRA, unless you can elect to contribute on a pre-tax basis if you want to, then it's a traditional IRA. Okay, so that covers all of our states. Now, the city mandates are interesting to me. These are a little bit more nuanced, and actually neither one of these city mandated plans are actually in operation today for various reasons. Let's talk about it. New York City, the law passed back in 2021. It was mandatory in auto enrollment to a payroll deduction IRA. Private sector employees with 5+ employees who don't have a plan, as we've seen with similar to the state mandates. There was a default contribution percentage of 5%, but this plan is not operational. And when I was researching this, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and I saw that the city passed this in 2021. Then subsequently, New York State passed their state mandate. There was a provision in the New York City mandate that said that if there was a state plan that covered a certain number of employers, that the city would rely on that plan instead of the city plan. So that is what has happened. I think there is some still outstanding question because the New York City and the New York State laws are not exactly the same. But I think right now New York City is not running, and we're going to be looking to see what happens with the mandates at the state level in New York. And kind of similar story with Seattle. The program's not anticipated to be implemented because of another state legal issue identified after the passage of the city program. It was supposed to be a payroll deposit IRA program for employers that don't currently offer qualified plans, or for those who don't participate in a MEP. I thought that this was interesting because, I mean, we see the efforts of cities. Clearly, there's a desire there, especially on the part of larger cities that may even have, a large representation of that share of people who are not, aren't covered by a plan or don't have assets. But then we see sort of the pushback, and it's not even really pushback, it's just legislative nuance. Because in both of these cases, there is already a state-run program, with New York's program coming down the pipeline and Washington's program already in operation. So there's a little push and pull we see between really, at the municipal level, then at the state level, and then, of course, at the federal level, which is where we're talking ERISA, sponsoring your own plan, and things of that nature. So again, a lot of moving parts, changing landscape. It's important to be aware of what's going on, but it looks like the state mandates are gaining in traction. And then, of course, at the federal level, we've had Secure 2.0, which has some impact on plan creation as well. Okay, it's time for our second quiz question. For which employers would a state-sponsored plan be a good fit? A, employers who already sponsor a retirement plan. B, employers who want to provide company contributions. C, employers that are not interested in contributing. Or D, employers who want to maximize plan contributions for the owner.
The poll will remain open for another 10 seconds for anyone who has not yet answered the question. The poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. Thank you so much. And the answer is C. Small employers that are not interested in contributing. Again, if you already have a plan, you're probably not looking to a mandate. If you want to do a company contribution because you want a deduction or you want to provide for your employees, a mandate's not going to get you there. And same with D, it's not going to get you there in terms of maximizing contributions for the owner. But if you're a small business, this is all very overwhelming for you, and all of a sudden now you're impacted by a mandate. You might want to pursue that direction or guide clients or potential clients to pursue that direction. So moving on, we said that there is also sort of the federal level here and, of course, the impact of Secure 2.0. So let's touch on that for a couple of minutes as well. Secure 2.0 provided for an enhanced plan startup credit. This applies to plans that have 50 or fewer employees. It increases the plan startup credit from 50 to 100% up to $5,000 for the first 3 years. Plus, it offers an additional credit up to $1,000 per employee for employer contributions to DC plans. This is a credit for the employer. So again, if you have a business owner who you're working with and they're looking for ways to improve their tax situation, obviously there are other reasons to start up a retirement plan, but that certainly ticks off that box and fits the bill. So it's definitely a compelling reason for a small business owner to consider pursuing starting up a plan. It applies to MEPs and PEPs as well, and it's for taxable years beginning after 12/31/2022. There are also some small, immediate financial incentives. Secure 2.0 enabled employers to offer de minimis, and that means up to $250. Financial incentives can't be paid for with plan assets, but it's intended to boost employee deferrals in 401k and 403b plans. And that's effective for plan years also beginning after 12/29/22. This is interesting to me because I actually used to provide education consulting services to our clients, and it's always difficult to get people to show up to those enrollment meetings and things like that. So now you could give them a small gift card or a small token to encourage them to participate. Now there are some nuances around this. As I said, it can't be paid for with plan assets, and I think it has to be for certain purposes, not necessarily like contribute more, but for purposes of participation. So just be aware of those regs. There's also some rules around starter 401k and 403b plans. It permits an employer without a retirement plan to offer a starter 401k plan or a safe harbor 403b plan. It requires that all employees are automatically enrolled at a deferral rate of 3 to 15% of comp, so it just has to be within that window. Deferrals are limited to the annual IRA contribution limit, so a little bit lower, $7,000 for 24, $8,000 if you're 50 or older, effective for plan years beginning after 12/31/23. So you can offer this plan. You have to have auto-enroll. It's got a little bit of a lower contribution level, but it's a foot in the door if you're not interested in a mandate. If an employer is not interested in a mandate, I should say, and it's a little bit more streamlined maybe than the whole universe of sponsoring your own plan. Auto-enrollment was a key piece of Secure 2.0 as well. It requires that all employers with more than 10 employees establish an auto-enrollment 401k or 403b. So, what's kind of happening here is you're either going to get funneled into a state mandate or you're probably going to be required to do something via Secure 2.0. Obviously, there are exceptions. As we can see here, it's more than 10 employees. But again, the goal, and we can see the goal across the board at the city, state, and federal level really is expand access with auto enroll, with auto escalation. That is universally the trend. So this has got some provisions that dictate in year one, the auto enroll percentage has to be at least 3% and up to 10%. So a pretty wide band. Years 2 through 8, that deferral amount is increased by 1% until it reaches at least 10%, but not more than 15%. Participants, just like auto enrollment today, can opt out or elect another percentage. People are never required. Existing plans are exempt. There are a few other exceptions, as I mentioned earlier, and this is for plan years on and after 12/31/2024. So we have a little bit more time to implement this. I think the good news here is that I think at this point, every service provider well knows how to administer auto enroll and auto escalation provisions. So really no concerns from that standpoint. I think it really is at this point just turning the tide of employer opinion on auto enrollment. I used to have discussions with employers, and there are a number of reasons why employers would be reluctant to implement auto enrollment that I used to come across. Administrative nuance, not wanting to seem too paternalistic or controlling over employees' money. And I think that those are valid concerns, but I think that we can point to the fact as practitioners that Secure 2.0 really is showing us that this is the way that the industry is going. So, sometimes it takes a mandate or, a little bit longer for employers to adopt, but this is a clear signal that this is something that employers should be considering if they are not offering it already. Then we have the Secure 2.0 Savers Match. This repeals and replaces the credit for IRA and retirement plan contributions, and it includes a federal matching contribution deposited into a taxpayer's IRA or retirement plan. The match is 50% of IRA or retirement plan contributions up to $2,000 per individual. It does have an income phase out between $41,000 and $71,000 if you're joint, with a different phase out, as you can see in the parentheses, for single and head of household filers. So it's a pretty low cap, I would say, in terms of salary. But I also think we have to look at this from that overall perspective of what's the goal here. The goal is to incentivize people who are not traditionally contributing to do so. So a lot of times that's going to be our lower earners, and that this is clearly a targeted incentive towards those folks. And then there are several enhancements to simple IRA plans as well. It allows Roth, again, continuing with that theme of the Rothification and really a lot of our recent legislation. It increased the deferral limits beginning in 2024. We saw that earlier on the chart. So that's the simple is, now an interesting way of getting a simple, easy to administer plan, but maybe with a higher limit than it previously had. Additional employer contributions as well. So I think the government is realizing that in terms of also, increasing coverage, we want to increase the limits and the opportunities on some of these easier plans as well, or more starter type plans. You could also upgrade from a simple to just a 401k plan mid-year, beginning 2024. A lot of employers might start out with a simple plan and then maybe want to change if their business grows or expands. Much like the changes a couple of years ago to the safe harbor regs that allowed mid-year changes, this is just loosening the regs. Why make it complicated for small businesses if we don't have to? Qualified student loan repayment matching contributions beginning in 2024. Now, this one I think has a little bit more administrative nuance tied in with it, so I would definitely recommend checking with record keepers that you work with prior to bringing this up as a potential option to clients. But I've heard a lot of buzz around this from the participant standpoint. So I know that there's definitely an appetite for it, from an employee level. But we just want to make sure that we sync up with record keepers so that everybody's on the same page. And then higher catch-up limits for ages 60 to 63 beginning in 2025. Again, just the theme, not only coverage, but also ability to save is something that we want to focus on. Okay, now it's time for our third quiz question before we run out of time here. True or false? Secure Act 2.0 provided additional incentives for employers to establish plans.
The poll will remain open for another 10 seconds for anyone who has not yet selected an answer. The poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Thank you so much, Jen. And this one, as we round out the hour together here, is an easy one. The answer, of course, is true. We just looked at several slides at the additional incentives that Secure 2.0 provided for employers to establish plans. But again, I think the interesting theme here is that we see incentives on the state level, we see mandates on the state level, we see incentives on the federal level. Federal, state, and municipal governments are not always in unison and lockstep when it comes to their desires. This is a really clear example of a time where all three levels of government really are advocating for and legislating for similar outcomes, which just gives us a sense for, I think, what's to come in terms of the industry. I don't think that this is a fight that's going to end here. I think that there's going to be, maybe more expansion of state programs, more expansion of access, limits, coverage, and all that stuff that, we've been trying for so long. But the next question becomes, okay, that was a lot of information. How do we take that and make it actionable for our clients? I think that a good way to approach this is to encourage employers to consider a plan suitability study. You can do this with current clients as part of maybe an annual plan review. You could do this as prospecting, as a way to open the door potentially to new clients, again, especially in those states that are impacted by the mandates. We saw many are impacted and coming online this year or next year. And, this isn't just a self-serving thing. This is a positive outcome for the employer, too. And that's why I stress so many times during this, we want to do it in the right way. This is an opportunity, I think, for a lot of people who have never had any retirement savings to start, getting into the game and getting a little something saved. And we can help employers navigate that world. So, some questions that you might want to ask employers. On the left side, do you have a plan? On the right side, no plan. So if you already have a plan, you might want to consider maybe a plan with a higher limit if you're not able to maximize contributions. Maybe you're experiencing plan testing failures, desire to increase participation, reduce fiduciary liability, or to take advantage of new options under Secure 2.0. Now we're running out of time here today, but I think depending on the employer's appetite for each one of these options, you would then pursue, a relevant conversation. Maybe if you're experiencing plan testing failures, I'm just going to grab the low-hanging fruit. That's an opportunity to consider a safe harbor plan. If you don't have a plan, there's a lot of reasons to have one. And again, this opens the door to potential prospects and, maybe empowers them to help their employees be better prepared for retirement. If employees have a desire to save, or the employer wants to provide a key retirement benefit for themselves or for certain employees or for everybody. New tax advantages via the deductions and Secure 2.0 provisions we just looked at. Lots of plan designs and features. You can go basic with a mandate or simple. You could take it to the next level with a 401k or safe harbor design, or have a combo plan with a cash balance and, significantly higher annual limits. So lots of options. And if you have a plan, then you're not going to be subject to the state mandate. A lot of employers don't like the idea of being mandated, to have a plan. This is a way to get ahead of it, and perhaps a way that's more palatable by exploring different plan design options. So this is kind of summarized. We already spoke about a lot of this, but they've got a lot of options available. We want to help them pare that down in a way that makes sense and is actionable. And most business owners are definitely unaware of the various design options that are available to them. That's why asking those targeted questions, what are you looking to contribute, deduct, things like that, really help point us in the direction of a conversation that is meaningful for employers. Lots of options these days. And as you have these conversations with clients, I think another important thing to consider in the bottom right, cash flow, employee demographics, owners' objectives, all of this is going to help drive the type of plan that's ideal. And some of these other topics are beyond the scope of our purpose today, which is to discuss state mandates and federal incentives. But, owners' objectives, we talked about that today, but demographics and cash flow will drive this too. We don't necessarily want to drive an employer to sponsor their own, cash balance plan, which is going to have an annual minimum required contribution, presumably, if they don't have the cash flow to support it. So all this to say, we ask the question up front, what do you desire in terms of a retirement plan outcome? But that doesn't end the conversation, and we don't necessarily make recommendations on desires alone. We need to also look at the full picture. What is, again, the cash flow of your business, and can it support this plan design? If not, maybe you are looking at a mandate where you don't have to worry about making contributions and things like that. And then the demographics. Maybe you as an employer or a client wants to have the maximum possible contribution level, but maybe there's a lot of employees who've never previously contributed to a retirement plan, and that might be too confusing. So all these options really go in hand with each other. This is a really neat chart that you can use in your practice to help you recommend the right plan solution based on the type of client or prospect that you're dealing with. And I love this. And again, as Jen said, we'll be circulating this recording so you can have access to this later on. But we've got who can establish, who contributes, and then the maximums. And you can see we've got the IRA-based plans on the left over here. And we've got our qualified 401k with profit sharing, salary deferral only, and DB over here. Didn't put the limit for the DB plans over here because it is significantly above and beyond the other limits, and sometimes it depends on your plan design and your business and other features. But I think there is an optimal plan design for every business, and as we see, these businesses are now being required to adopt. And I think of us and our role as practitioners as, somewhat of a matchmaker. To kind of put it lightly, we have all these different, very nuanced and complex plan designs. We're the intermediary to kind of make it a little bit easier to digest and make those appropriate recommendations in light of all this background noise and nuance. This is another way just of looking at those limits. Again, at the beginning, we talked just about how much do you want to contribute. Now this brings in those additional considerations. What are you looking for in terms of contributions? What's the cost consideration to you as an employer? Again, the next step, once we learn about desires, is do you have the cash flow to support this? And here is an example of how an owner could maximize contributions over time using a cash balance plan. Remember I said a minute ago that the limit is variable depending on some factors? Here you go. And you can see here in the combined plan total on the right, just how significant savings to a cash balance plan could be. Again, if you have the right employer with an appetite for that kind of thing. So with our last minute here, just critical next steps. Meet with your clients and your prospects. Do they have a mandate? Do they have a plan in place? Either way, a suitability study is a great thing to consider to help you determine the right type of plan. And don't forget about those Secure 2.0 options. That'll also lead into a discussion about looking at plan providers, fees, services, and then if needed, you can help clients establish a plan. All right, well, Jen, I'll turn it back to you because I think I'm at time. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining in today.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everyone who attended today's webinar. Any questions that we did not get to today, we will follow up with you separately. As a reminder, please complete the survey questions that will pop up on your screen in just a minute. Everyone have a great rest of your day.